You lit a flame that consumed my hate. I'm now one for reminiscing, but I traded all for your sweet embrace. 'Cause we lost everything. We had to pay the price. There's a canvas with two faces of fallen angels who loved and lost. It was a passion for the ages, but in the end, guess we paid the cost.
Witam was wszystkich bardzo serdecznie na streamie CyberNight, czyli eventu, który Redzi zorganizowali tak naprawdę chwilę przed premierą Cyberpunka. Gra będzie dostępna na PC-tach już o 1:00 w nocy na całym świecie. Niestety nie dało się tego obejść VPN-em, dlatego u mnie odcinki się dzisiaj nie pojawiły. I pojawił się najbliższy, pierwszy odcinek pojawi się jutro o 9:00 i zapewne wrzucę od razu drugi, który będzie gdzieś koło 17:00 następnego dnia. I generalnie zobaczymy, co to będzie, bo to jest na Twitterze i to mnie trochę dziwi, bo ja nie wiem, czy to będą jakieś filmy powrzucane, czy co to będzie, czy będzie livestream. W każdym razie robimy to sobie przez godzinę. Zapewne to całe wydarzenie potrwa dłużej, bo na przykład dla ludzi na konsolach się generalnie gra odblokowuje w momencie, kiedy w danej strefie czasowej nastanie północ. Czyli u nas na konsolach już też mogą grać, ale na PC się nie da. Także no. A w tle leci kurwa tak zajebisty cover na Fade Away, który był w launch trailerze, że to jest... po prostu tak mi ta muza weszła w głowę. I w ogóle dzisiaj jestem merch boyem, mam czapeczkę, mam koszuleczkę i nawet cię szarpłem na skarpetki. Także no. Będzie grane. Będą grane cyberpunki. Tylko mówię, nie wiem, co to będzie na tym Twitterze. Ja też na Twitterze mam trochę rzeczy Rule 34, które się na YouTube'a nie nadają, także mam nadzieję, że nie dostaniemy bana w międzyczasie. Znaczy postaram się siedzieć tylko na tych Twitterach Redów i Twitter Gaming, bo inaczej może być srogo. Także jak zerwię streama, to zapewne przez bana. I mówię, nie mam tego pojęcia, jak to do końca będzie wyglądać, bo wiecie, na jakimś Twitchu czy coś, to po prostu byłby stream, tak? I tyle. Jest tu jakiś przypięty tweet, ale na tym przypiętym tweetie jest ten trailer, który jakby wprowadzał w stacje radiowe w którymś tam Night City Wire. Że nie wiem. No i w tle oczywiście leci jakaś tam muzyczka z cyberka, mam odpaloną playlistę. Tylko tutaj nie wszystko jest... nie wszystko YouTube... nie wszystko YouTube przepuszcza, o tak. Bo na przykład ten spoiler od Hypera z pierwszego trailera, znaczy drugiego trailera tak naprawdę, pierwszego tego właściwego trailera, nie tego teasera z 2012 roku, YouTube za to demonetyzuje filmy. Także to trochę lipka. A jutro jeszcze przypomnę, co prawda nie zrobiłem sobie, ale mogę zaraz sobie to ogarnąć, dlatego że jutro o 1:00 w nocy, a właściwie to o 00:30 zacznie się pre-show do The Games Awards 2020, także zapraszam już teraz na tego streama również. Będzie tam dużo fajnych gwiazd, będą prezentacje nowych gier, według plotek będzie nowy Dragon Age 4, będzie The Wolf Among Us 2, będzie jeszcze pewnie wiele innych premier. Będą fajne osoby, będzie Keanu Reeves, będzie Gal Gadot, tak jak ona się nazywa, ta co gra Wonder Woman. Będzie ten co gra Spidermana, no ogólnie będzie dużo gwiazd. A w każdym... Oj, nie zmieniłem ostatecznie, halo. Jak to nie zmieniłem ostatecznie? No mam też przecież klikałem, żeby mi... Aha, dobra, nie zmieniło. Chyba jak zrobię... Tak? Nie. O fuck, dobra, bo ja zjebałem to. Nie to zjebałem, co trzeba, w sensie źle zrobiłem. Wait for it. Zaraz będzie dobra graficzka. Nagrody, TGA... O, proszę bardzo. Będzie. O, tak jak tu piszę. Także no. Minuta niby została. Tylko mówię, nie wiem czy tutaj coś będzie. Szykuj korka, żeby dupę statkiem strzelać po sobie z szczęścia. To dopiero za godzinę, jak odpalę grę. Generalnie. Tylko mówię, nie mam tego pojęcia, w jakiej formie to będzie tutaj. Na tym Twitterze. Po prostu nie jestem sobie w stanie tego wyobrazić. Więc co ja nawet może zrobię full screena. Już nie, bez sensu. W każdym razie, no mówię, no bo to będzie na Twitterze. Także jestem bardzo ciekaw, jak to będzie wyglądać. Też nie wiem, czy trzeba będzie go odświeżać, czy co. Zobaczymy. Zobaczymy już za minutę, za paręnaście sekund, za 5 sekund niby. Miało się zacząć o północy, na razie nie gram muzy ze Spotify'a. Miały być jakieś wywiady z twórcami. Inne niespodzianki miały być, także zobaczymy. To jest chyba polski, tylko Twitter, nie, trochę jest też angielskiego. Szczęśliwego nowego roku, tak. Coś w tym stylu. Mam nawet ustawione przypomnienie, nie? Także... No jestem ciekaw. Bo już jest po północy. Póki co nic się nie dzieje, sobie jeszcze wpalę może Twittera Cyberpunka. Generalnie. O, proszę bardzo, transmisja na żywo jest. Nie wiedziałem nawet, że na Twitterze są transmisje na żywo. Generalnie. Wow. Nie chcę Alany. Alany później. Dobra, proszę bardzo. Tylko, no, jako że to Twitter, to nie można ustawić jakości ani nic. Polsat Games jeszcze leci. No oni pewnie będą do premiery gry lecieć, jak nie dłużej. T-47, 30, no 40 ileś tam seconds. Także no, będzie normalnie oglądane. Szkoda, że to robią na Twitterze, szczerze. Bo mówię, z tym ustawianiem jakości i tak dalej. Mnie to tak wkurwia, jak mi serwisy nie dają ręcznie zafiksować po prostu jakości. W każdym razie, running file, CyberNight.exe. Transmission starting, T-25 seconds. No, będzie odliczanko za chwilę. Za chwilę robimy ostre odliczanie. T-15 seconds. T-10. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have a liftoff! O, tam właśnie był tweet dokładnie mojego playthrough. Czyli corpo female, hacker, skradanie.
Hey, it's Paris. Welcome to Ask a Dev. And I want to thank everyone out there in
I
Twitter.
zajebiście, na początku będzie Q&A z twórcami, także idolo.
And I'm going to do the best I can to submit these questions to the devs. So I want to welcome both Miles
Hello.
and Patrick.
Howdy.
Fuck, nie będzie Pawła Sasko.
And answer your burning questions about Cyberpunk 2077.
By the way, jednej rzeczy wam nie pokazałem, nawet mam theme na klawiaturze cyberpunkowej, nie widać tego, nie podniosę bardziej klawiatury.
Is there anything specifically that influenced or inspired each one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the original Cyberpunk 2020 is really the big
Zapis Bartko będzie na kanale od razu jak się skończy, tylko się przetworzy.
You actually have a life path at the beginning when you create your character, and that tells you where your character is from, if your character has any family members, friends, and things like that, experiences that your character has had. We tried to pull out 3 iconic experiences from the cyberpunk world, the Corpo, the Street Kid, and the Nomad, and we incorporated those into the story so that you could pick between those and sort of get an idea of who your character is before you start.
All right, and let's go ahead and answer that next question, which is, when you began development all those years ago, what did you think would be the biggest hurdles in development? And now, only a couple days away from release, what were some of the actual hurdles that you faced?
God, that's a difficult one. Patrick, it's actually also yours because, the way we did this development on Cyberpunk was that I think it was started all the way in 2012 even, right? Was it as early as that? And then due to Witcher 3, most of the team switched actually over to help out with Witcher 3 at some point, right? And then it was in sort of 2016 after Blood and Wine when the entire team switched back to Cyberpunk. That's when I came on board of the project as well. But Patrick, is actually one of the very few OG Cyberpunk developers that's been with us since 2012, and that's why I think.
No proszę, czyli tak było.
God, what was the biggest hurdle? I think the biggest hurdle was just production. Trying to figure out how expensive, how much it was going to take to get the game done, and how to make it get done, and how to work all that out. That's an ongoing problem with any project of this size, and certainly it wasn't planned that we'd have to pull everybody over to work on Witcher 3 as well. So, that was something.
Yeah, and I suppose, with how many iterations this game went through in all these years, it's sort of really hard to say what was the most difficult thing at any given point in time, because, if you just look at the versions that we had, the game changed dramatically. It's like 4 different, 5 different games, depending on how many iterations we actually went through, which I'm not quite sure how many there were, but
I feel the same way. I mean, I was telling some people who are sort of new to the project, we're launching.
No ciężko, żebym ja ogarnął kogoś z CD Projektu na takie zasięgi, jakie mam, także ale się ma sosy.
This happened and we did this and you're supposed to be able to do this, going back 8 years now. So there's a lot to talk about.
All right, let's go on to the next question.
To generalnie leci z Twittera, z tego CyberNight.
Also, looking at Cyberpunk 2020, what was the process behind choosing what to keep, what not, and what to change? For example, bozos were a big deal back in that game, but they are nowhere to be seen in 2077, apparently.
Well, I feel like there's 2 questions there, so I'll take them on one after the other. As for how we create quests, usually we start with just an idea. That idea can be a cool scene, a cool character, some twist that happens in the story, something like that. We turn that into a paragraph description, and then the quest designer figures out how to turn that into something that the player can actually play with gameplay chunks and proper pacing and story.
Potwierdzam, tak się właśnie robi. Tak, Bartko, ciebie też potwierdzam. Dzięki za pochwalenie mojego kondomka na głowie.
And figure out exactly who's going to be responsible for building each piece. Putting them all together is the quest designer's responsibility, and making sure that it works. And
generalnie mam nadzieję, że kiedyś to będzie moja robota.
You do it over and over again until you get it the way that you like it, So it's important to try to get it right in the documentation as best you can, so that you have to iterate later on when it gets more expensive less frequently. As for deciding what to keep and what not to keep from the lore of 2020 and all of that, we wanted this to be a continuity with the original 2020 tabletop. So we've tried to keep as much of that as we can. When we change things, we always try to put a twist on it, some sort of spin that's plausible and doesn't break that continuity. But certainly there are omissions that get made if they don't make sense for the story. If your character is unlikely to encounter a certain situation or a certain type of character, or in this case a specific gang from the original 2020 books, if that doesn't fit thematically.
Aha, tego właśnie nie lubię na jakichś takich serwisach, które nie są stricte do streamowania, jak jakieś streamy są. Że chociaż jakość się nie zmniejsza, tylko będzie ciąć widza.
Thank you for that. Let's go to the next question. Cyberpunk 2077, coming out with many different languages all over the world. What types of challenges did you guys have to overcome? The differences in language with jokes and story? And did you have to change any dialogue completely to make it understandable in other countries?
That's a difficult question for us. We're quest designers and level designers, but I can say we have a robust localization team that is stationed all around the world. They're all native speakers in their languages and experts on their culture. And we pretty much leave that to them. You know, if they think something needs to change, they'll work with the English adaptation team or sometimes the Polish writers directly to try to get all that working and try to make it as smooth as possible. If you, for example, it can even extend beyond just the dialogue, because if, for example, you create a storyline for a character from a certain culture, and you build that out and you think, oh, this is great, but then our localizers from that country say, this doesn't quite make sense, maybe we should do it this way. We listen to them and we try to incorporate those changes into the stuff, because we want everyone around the world to play this in whatever language they prefer, and we want it to make sense in those languages. We want to give you a parity of experience so that
Tak, Sasek, z tego co... No to jest kolejna iteracja Red Engine'u, czyli wychodzi na 3.4. W ogóle ktoś tam, było jakieś potwierdzenie, że będą przenoszone narzędzia modelskie z Wiedźmina 3 do właśnie Cyberpunka i mają działać.
I guess the short answer to that question is spend a lot of money on your localization team.
I can actually add a little bit to that. I guess this is sort of the real strength where it comes in to have most of our localization being done in-house, right? I don't think that's something many studios do around the world, and I think that especially with us being a studio that focuses on storytelling, this is really where, you know, the magic happens, when the localization writers are able to talk directly with the actual, you know, story writers and interact there and make sure that the content is properly localized within different languages. And I must say also, I can, of course, really only speak about the German dub version because, you know, other than the English ones, I don't speak any other language other than German. But one of the beautiful things that I've noticed is that the individual teams working on their respective languages, they're putting a lot of extra love and effort into their languages. And having played both of us...
To taka ciekawostka, dzisiaj obejrzałem sobie wstęp do rosyjskiej wersji tego launch trailera. Kurwa, te suka bliać, jakie tam jest, tam po prostu bliać. Po prostu zrobiło mój poranek i to było takie bekowe.
And then there's versions where I think the English version is better, right? And you know, even the cast that you have in these different languages can really affect sort of how a performance is really carried, right? We do try to keep them sort of on... Oops. We do try to keep them sort of on the same level, of course, but it's nice to have a certain flavor and uniqueness in each separate version that actually makes it feel, you know, like this language is almost like the original voiceover language, right? Which in games is a bit difficult to say, but I think there's a high level of authenticity that I hope that when players actually get to play it in their language, they will really appreciate.
That is awesome. Now, I have another question. This will be for both of you. And I think I know the guy that asked this question. He's a pretty cool guy. But he says, how much does level design impact quest concepts and structure? If you have an amazing idea for a quest, could this force a change in level design? In development, which comes first? The level, the quest concept, or are they both created in tandem? He's a real cool guy that has.
We all have like different answers on it depending on who you ask.
Ja bym strzelał, że raczej to quest designerzy i questy tutaj dyktują jakby to, jak wyglądają lokacje.
Because I know in the past it's sort of like it bounces off each other really, right? I know in Witcher 3 we've had moments where, you know, we've came up with locations that we then later filled up with quest content. I remember going to certain quest designers going like, dude, we have this location, like couldn't we do something cool here, right? Or it also happens the other way around, where our quest designers, right, they will have come up with an interesting stage, right, if you will, for their quest, and they're asking us to come up, you know, to help prepare that stage. And usually this process is a lot of fun because, you know, it's like two completely different creative angles trying to chip away at the same problems and challenges, right, and trying to find common grounds. And it's nice to see how you can sort of uplift each other from these different perspectives. And one thing that I also find very fascinating with this is that usually I know at least the level designers that I know I work with, they sort of are, you know, sort of humble enough to kind of go, okay, you know, we're a studio about story, right? We try to infuse a lot of, you know, put a lot of focus on the gameplay aspect of this, but in the end, we want to tell a story, and I have
No właśnie, tak myślałem, to właśnie jest mój punkt tutaj, przynajmniej w przypadku Cyberpunka i Redów.
How the player will play the game, right? I can prepare different paths. I can say, okay, you might break through this door, you might break through this door, but there is a lot of choice in how the player goes it. And I'm not married to the idea that the player needs to go here, the player needs to go here, but rather, you find your own path. I like to akin the way we design our locations to this sort of like penetrable fortress design, right? And so yeah, in that sense, the stage is entirely for the quest designers to infuse
and
it
Miles,
with their
from
narrative.
my point of view, anytime you make a suggestion, it's fantastic, and I almost always incorporate it. So,
All right, let's go on to the next question. What is the most significant portion of your work that we as players won't even see? Behind the scenes stuff, something that you're most proud of.
That's really good. Like I know that during development, there's so many moments, like conversations, coffee break conversations, where you're frustrated and you go like, oh man, I have to do this really annoying task because which job doesn't have them, right?
No, na przykład ja dzisiaj wszystkie obiekty, żeby się znikały w DevLive z eventu świątecznego, ja pierdolę, zrobiłem połowę i jeszcze drugie tyle i to jest takie nudne.
And one thing actually, all right, I've got to do it. I'm going in. Topic is doors, right?
Dlatego Sasek, że C++ jest do gier, jest język niższego poziomu, przez co jest większa kontrola nad kodem i po prostu on lepiej działa niż C#.
But doors in level design can be so many things. They can be an obstacle, right? They can be a passage. They can be
O, dobra, jest rozprawa o drzwiach w level designie.
They can be tools to sort of guide the narrative, right? These are now locked, but after you do a certain thing, these open and you can do stuff. And it allows us to guide the player through levels in many certain ways. And then, they're not just easy things that just work like that when you actually play the game, right? Doors are super difficult when you try to bring AI into the whole fray, right? Because these AI characters, they don't understand what a door is and how it works, right? You need to teach them, and then you need to explain to them. And then, these AI characters, they need to understand how to deal with a door in combat, right? When they can pass through, when they can't. And I know for a long time I remember when we were debugging this game a long time ago, there was this one bug where NPCs would just open locked doors as they walk past it. And the whole idea was that, of course, when an NPC walks past the door, they should be able to open it, right? But this was like the first iteration of bringing this in, and it caused this issue where, like, suddenly NPCs could walk everywhere and unlock passages for the player that they weren't meant to go through just like that, right? And it's something that by the end of the whole process, when the player plays it, it's hopefully something you don't have to mind twice, right? But for us, it's a huge thing. We spend a lot of times and meetings on it, and yeah, big deal. Doors. There you go.
and I mean, from the quest side, it's similar. Some of the things that seem most simple when you're actually playing the game are some of the most complicated sometimes. Like in our game, when you're talking to a character, you can actually walk away from them in a lot of places where they're talking to you, you're having a conversation, you're playing the quest, and you just decide, I see something cool, I'm gonna go over there. And the quest needs to be able to suspend itself and keep running so that when you go back, it will continue, but at the same time also not break your game. And sometimes we have those things where if you go and you walk away, something different will happen. Sometimes we just have it suspended. Either way, the vast majority...
Ja jestem ciekaw właśnie, jak to będzie działać. Nie będę tak jakoś mocno testować, bo ja raczej nie lubię odchodzić od dialogów, ale to będzie ciekawe.
So that you can do exactly that. And
To mnie jeszcze najbardziej w tej grze jara. No i dzisiaj już się przekonamy za 40 minut.
I think I'm proud of the stuff that Quest Design and the cinematics team have done to make that system work.
This actually reminds me of one last thing I can add to that, which is, we spend a lot of time on our skip dialogue mechanic, which hopefully none of you will ever use, right? Because
Będzie skip dialog? Co?
But, in a game where you can move freely as you talk, right, in most of the conversations, and everything happens in real time around you, how do you skip a dialogue right? Like, what happens? You know, in Witcher 3, the camera was locked.
Nie spodziewałem się. Nie spodziewałem się.
But how does this happen when everything still keeps happening around you, right? And we were thinking about a lot of things, fade in, fade out, and then it just pop forward. And ultimately, we decided to do something much, much more elaborate, right? Which is allowing the player to literally, the time goes fast forward, right? And people who skip it, they might go, that's cool, once they do it first time, but then they, will press the button and just kind of forget about it. But that's also something that took us a long, long time to figure out and to get right.
Jestem ciekaw, jak to działa, czy może kiedyś przetestuję.
None of you will ever use.
All right, moving on to the next question. What would you say would be the hardest part of the whole game to create? What aspect would you think is the hardest and most important part of the game to be implemented? This person is very excited for the game and hopes you have a great day.
I mean, one of our rules about creating this world was that this needs to feel like a real world. It needs to feel like its own world, and for that, we created an all original soundtrack. There are very few licensed tracks on there. We created fake brands for all these different corporations. Some of them are from 2020, some of them are our own creations. We created advertisements for all of those. We came up with an entire history of the city using the 2020 material and of course the material from Cyberpunk Red, which is the new version of the tabletop role-playing game, and then our own history to come up with this history of the city, the different architectural styles, the different art styles being used, the movements of different populations. All of that stuff creates this place that we hope feels very real. And if it feels that real, like you're just gonna soak it in and you're gonna wanna soak it in. And when it comes to like that kind of suspension of disbelief, the player has to be a willing participant, right? And you have to meet the player halfway. They have to come part of the way, you have to go part of the way, but you're always saying, come on, come a little bit closer, come a little bit closer. Come on, let me take you, let me show you the city, let me show you this world that we've created. So all of that ties into the atmosphere. It also comes back to, again, theme, tone. Make sure that the stories you're telling are the stories that you want to tell and that they have, that they rhyme with one another, so that this topic doesn't get left just in that quest. It carries over to here, and this character has these traits, and that is, and that is a foil for this other character. All of that stuff is just a way of bringing the player along and getting them to believe in the world.
Circling back, what would you say would be the hardest part of the whole game to create?
That really depends on whom you ask. I'm sure like a cinematic designer will have a different answer, which is also valid,
well,
right?
Let me ask it this way then. Let me ask it this way. I'm going to freestyle it. So I think what the person's trying to say is, when you think of the game as the whole, what was some of the biggest challenges? What was something that was very hard to implement into the game throughout the process?
Yeah, I think that's still going to depend on who you ask. If you ask a programmer, they're going to say streaming. Definitely. I don't know. Miles, what do you have to say? I mean, like in terms of like the level design, because this is pretty different for us, right?
Yeah, it's. I think once I start, you'll probably find some similarities because for me, it must have been the non-linearity that we tried to do, not only with the story but also in our gameplay, right? Because we are providing the player with tons and tons of tools and different options of how you can actually play the game, right? You can, and I've said this before, right? You have so many different options in terms of weapons you can use, be it the melee, super far range, close range, shotguns, whatever, right? Do you want to play it stealthy? Do you want to play more aggressive? Do you want to hack devices and manipulate the environment around you? Or do you want to be able to craft very powerful grenades and just blow everything up? And I haven't even touched on the topic of different cyberware that you can get, right? And the different ways you can build your character to support all of these different playstyles. And for us, in level design, for sure, it must have been one of the most difficult tasks to make sure that all of these different playstyles are properly represented in the design, so that they all...
No i że każdy level można z danym setem umiejętności przejść, że nie ma takiego miejsca w grze, że z tymi umiejętnościami, które się ma, nie da się przejść dalej.
You don't want to invest points into a skill and end up in a situation where you feel like, well, but I'd never get to use this. What is this? And then maybe at the end, there's one moment where you get to use it, and then you're super happy that you actually invested in it. But no, we try to balance things, right? And it's trying to incorporate all of this into the stuff that you do. And that takes a lot of playtesting also to make sure it feels good, right? To come up with different paths that the player can do, that it almost, it's almost when we play, we have this moment where we often ask ourselves, okay, what would I like to do as a Netrunner type character? What would I like to do as a strong solo type character right now, right here? If I was going in guns blazing and I find myself in this spot, I run out of ammo, can I kind of support this, right? Or maybe there's an awesome gun that you can grab right off the ground and then start shooting with, or maybe we place some ammo. Maybe we need to add more hackable devices in a specific area that you can use to, I don't know, manipulate enemies into being distracted or blow them up when they get too close with something. And all of this becomes specifically complex and difficult when you consider that we also have a story that we want to tell, right? Because in by itself, making a sandbox location is not super mega difficult. It is a challenging task, but it becomes like 11 out of 10 difficult when you consider that there's certain story beats that you have, right? And non-linearity in my level design might break the flow of a quest, right? Where it's maybe supposed to be much more straightforward conversation or in certain scenarios. And God knows, we've had situations where, I came in all excited and I'm like, Patrick, I have this, look what my level can do. And he's like, yeah, but you just broke my quest here, and like this is not working anymore. And I'm like, oh God. And we try to find like how to make things work, and it's part of iteration, this, right? And again, very fascinating if arduous process, and I do think that the end result is really worth it. Like, you're going above and beyond to sort of provide for all these playstyles, because it truly allows this pen and paper character of the game to shine through, right? This freestyling of any situation, of going like, okay, I want to do this, and I roll my dice, and then the game master, which is in this case us, just has to roll with the punches, right? And yeah, that's sort of how we see ourselves.
Now, moving along to the next question. This is a kind of fun one. So this person is saying they're mostly fascinated by how the team developed all these new systems by stepping into such a new genre. The sound of distant gunfire, projectile-based combat, driving systems. These were all designed from the ground up, correct?
Yes, for this game, yeah.
That's that comes with us using our own tech for the most part, right? We have our own engine. So everything, not all, we do is in-house, right? Which comes with its perks, but also disadvantages. However, I don't think making the game the way we actually ended up doing it would have been possible without that. I don't know. I know that our quest tools are really powerful. I was quite impressed jumping into this, yeah. So, and we do quests, so there goes.
Very nice. So, along those lines, so this one is more about open worlds. So this person is saying, for open worlds, how do you decide when enough is enough? You can add loot, trash, world marketing, etc. till the end of time. But who makes the call on when to say, all right, that's it, we're done, this is complete?
Production and directors. Pretty much. It ends there. But it's, even for us, it's hard to say that. Like, one thing I always thought was pretty insane that we actually edited is that sort of we have this thing we call combat events, which are, I think, our smallest unit of content. They're the equivalent of the wolves roaming the fields in Witcher 3, right? It's just gangers hanging out in the city. And for us, it was important still that when we placed these, they're literally just waiting for the player to come around and kill them, right? But we didn't ever want to put up this feeling. So what we did is we made really, really sure that we actually always gave them a little thing to do, right? You stumble upon these gang guys and they'll always be doing something. They might just be hanging out, getting drunk, right? They might be trying to break into a vending machine, or they are robbing someone actually, or holding them at gunpoint, right? And it really adds to this feeling and atmosphere of Night City. And we didn't stop there, getting back to the question also, we actually, for these combat events, added at least 3 individual phases that each of these has. So basically, there are different permutations that this combat event can appear in. So you might come across spot A in the city, right, during the nighttime, and there might be some gang guys just hanging out, 3 or 4 enemies. And they're maybe, robbing someone, right? So you can interfere and get some loot, right? Some experience points, test your new skills, or your cyberware. And then when you come back, at least 2 days later, there'll be enemies at the same spot, but they'll be doing something different, right? And the composition of encounter might be slightly different, right? So there's a slight alteration, right? They'll not be robbing someone, they won't just respawn just like that, but they'll be trying to vandalize. There's a different group of enemies, and they'll vandalizing the walls with graffiti or something, right? And these events can also be time dependent, so sometimes they might be available.
Ciekawe, jak bardzo to będzie powtarzalne.
Nighttime, and certainly
Że to nie będzie taki pusty content po
characteristic of the
prostu,
district, right? How dangerous
który
it
się
is to
znudzi
play the role
szybko.
there. And this kind of causes like a very interesting thing to happen when you explore the world, because things slightly feel different. I don't think this is one of the things. I don't think most players will really notice this, because how often do you really look at the 3 gang guys hanging out that you kill, and how high is the chance that you remember what they were doing when you came back 3 days later, right, and kill them again? But I think subconsciously there's something the player notices, like a variety, right? Like, there's something different. It just helps make this city feel more alive. And this generally one of our approaches is when doing these things, when we go into ridiculous detail with some things that we do, we sort of think that the sum of things comes from the many, 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 many small things that we add, right? And they contribute to the larger picture of making this believable world that feels alive, that you can get lost in. And these are the little tricks and things where we go above and beyond to sort of make that happen.
When it comes to those small things, there's something magic about small things, which is, so there's an adage that I heard from a comedy writer that said this back in the 90s. He said, don't ever fail to tell a joke, because not enough people will get it. Because the fewer people that get that joke, the funnier it will be for those people. And I think it's the same for that kind of content, where if you create something that's very, very small and very few people see it, it becomes special for them. And then when they tell
Plus jeden.
I was at this place in Watson, and I was walking around the corner, and I saw this thing, and then this other thing happened, and so on. And you tell people about those things, and they didn't see those things. It becomes your thing, and those are the things that you hold on to and you remember about a game more than the overall, like...
No jakby Cyberpunk przynajmniej na PC-tach nie ma żadnych DRM-ów, a na konsolach to tam nie wiem jak wygląda krakowanie na konsolach na tej generacji. Na pewno na najnowszych pewnie jeszcze nie ma. Na PS4 i na Xbox One chyba też było ciężej niż na poprzednią generację, ale na PC-cie, znaczy nie wiem czy ktoś to obchodził, bo na PC startuje za pół godziny i będzie już wersja DRM free na Gogu, także będzie gra dostępna na pewno za darmo w necie bez problemu. Na konsolach, no to na konsolach, jeżeli masz na konsoli zawsze strefą czasową można było obejść, teraz to już tam nie ma w Polsce żadnego znaczenia.
So 7 years ago you had the first trailer and you had this clear idea of what the game would look like, I guess. But how much has that idea of you changed with time?
Oh God. Wow. Fun fact, by the way, I started at CD Projekt Red literally a day before that trailer launched.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I was joining and going like, why is everyone so tense? What's going on, right? It was also, I guess, when we were doing our first previews of Witcher 3, which wasn't announced back then, So, but Patrick, since you've been like one of the OGs, you would probably know better than I do.
We've been making this game for a long time, and one of the things about making video games this big and at this level of production is iteration. And you build stuff and you build back, and you build stuff and you build back. And every time you do that, you try to keep the thing that worked before. But this game has been in production for a long time, so there's been a lot of build up and build back. So, how far has this game come? I go back and I look at some of our early demos, and you can definitely see you can see the skeleton of what's going to be in there, but all the details change, and it's exciting to see. We've got some people who haven't been on the project very long, and like I said before, I've been talking to them about what the project used to be like, and yeah, sometimes they're very surprised to see the old footage. So yeah, it's pretty different.
All right, here we go. Next question. Where do you start with the world? Like, do you just develop the city section by section, detailed, or the whole thing first and detailed later?
Oh God, that is really one of these where, where you meet at the beginning, like, how do you start with the world? And the cool thing or the interesting thing about this is there is not really one starting point where you go, okay, now we build a world, right? The way we start shaping our worlds comes from many sort of different angles, right? There would be, for example, the story side, right? When the story is being written and then the quest designers start creating their quest designs, there's already sort of like a rough idea for the scope, the places that we'll need, right? At least in its most roughest state. So that helps, when you have to look at your huge piece of empty paper, white paper, and just go, okay, so there's at least already some dots and you just need to figure out where to shift them. In our case, what also really helped is that we actually we were using the source material, of course, from Mike Pondsmith, since the game is rooted in the pen and paper RPG lore, which gave us a lot of additional points, right, and hints. So now we are looking at even more dots that we can already start shuffling around, right? And then we were also looking at it from the point of view that we kind of know it's in a real world spot, right? So it's in California. Right? It's on the coast. And just talking about a coastal city that is so technologically advanced as Night City is, you can make a few assumptions on to what you would expect from this kind of city. For example, hey, this probably should have some kind of harbor that would support, world trade. There might be some industrial areas that sort of go with this. Night City is a place where technology has risen and is being promoted to rise to an insane degree. So you expect to be to have a kind of area that's sort of the Silicon Valley of Night City, right? And all of these little things, you start trying to get more and more clues, if you will, onto your piece of paper, and then you start shuffling them around, right? And that starts forming the shape of a rough city. We actually consulted city designers to help us, like actual urban architects, to kind of help us out, to figure out how a actual city space works, right? And this is the cool part of a level design job as well, because you need to kind of get into these things, right? You become a little bit of an architect, you become a little bit of a urban planner yourself, right? And then we broke down the city into its different districts, again, as inspired by the lore. You try to write down sort of the rough characteristics of each district. So Watson, mostly industrial, right? Shocked by earthquakes, high level in crime and all that stuff. And, you define an art style, and then you take this district and divide it into further sub-districts, and you give them each different characteristics. So again, with Watson, that would be Little China, the Arasaka waterfront, and Northside industrial, right? And as you sort of iron this out, hammer this out more and more, it starts, to also connect to the other pieces. You kind of realize, okay, if this is the industrial heart of the city, or this used to be, then this means the actual industrial heart has moved somewhere else. So that could be this district, right? And how would that look, right? Where do the people that work here actually live? Like do they travel from the city? Like,
to jest bardzo ciekawe, generalnie wszystkie poprzednie Q&A o tej grze tak, nie mogę powiedzieć. A teraz to po prostu na każde pytanie jest referat.
And all of this stuff, you bring that all together, and hopefully you end up with something that not only feels believable in a life, but also that something that has a lot of variety in it for the player to actually explore. And this is something that we really try to break down with each district, right? And I think you will find that if you actually travel the city, you will notice that, there's some very distinct looking districts which really help you to navigate this space, right? You'll be into Japantown, okay, I'm in Japantown simply by looking around. But at the same time, it's not like we created 6 cities, but one coherent one that connects well together and that sort of seemingly transitions in a very believable way. You could really look at Night City and go, yeah, I think, this could exist. And in parts even, having been lucky to have traveled a bit in my life already, it's really cool to have these little flashback moments where I'm like, man, this reminds me of my vacation in Tokyo, right? And oh, this remembers when I was walking in downtown LA, and it's really, really crazy. And I hope people will have these same moments and these same emotions that we have when we play this stuff.
All right, so let's go on to the next question. Now, earlier I asked you what was the hardest part of creating the game, but this is for both of you, Miles and Patrick. What was the highlight of development? Obviously, there's so much good stuff in development and hard times. But for you personally, what part during the 7 years do you consistently look back to and smile about?
Miles, you want to go first?
No, I just spent a lot of time talking. Let me think.
I'll talk then. I have my answer. My answer is actually pretty recent, and maybe that's just recency bias. But for me, once everything really starts to come together and you start to play the game and you're playing it, and I've been in this industry a while and I've worked on games, and one of the things about just working on games is that when you play an unfinished game, it's never fun. It's never fun. And there's a moment on a project where if your game is good, you're going to play the game, and you sit down to play it because you got to play it, because you have to know what's in the game and you have to know how it works. And you start playing it and you realize you don't want to stop because enough of the pieces of the puzzle are fit together now that you start to see the whole thing. And that moment for me, when that moment hit, it was like, yeah, that was also my favorite moment of Witcher 3, is sitting down to play it and just being like, I want to keep playing. This is really good. This is exactly the kind of game that I want to play, and I helped make it. And it's great. It's very rewarding.
A później się nudzi w pizdu, bo musisz robić to samo 10 000 razy w ostatniej fazie produkcji.
Oh, maybe actually, it's oddly similar between Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk. When you're working on a game this complex, you tend to be very close to your own work at a certain point, right? And you start, to kind of lose track of what is going on around you outside of your own work, essentially, right? Or the bit of the game that you're working on. And it's, it can be frustrating at times because, you see, of course, the flaws in your work. You see that it's not done yet, but you don't really notice when stuff is progressing around you, at a similar rate. And then it's really a magical moment, once you get through this tunnel vision and you sit down. And I remember this very vividly in Witcher 3, where it was, and I'm sort of branching out to a different game for now, but so that was like, at one point, it's not like it's like a moment where it's like, okay, it's slowly happening, but it's sort of from one day to the other. You start playing it, and I was walking through Novigrad, right? And, the soundtrack, the music came in, the ambient music, right? I heard the people walking around. I remember it was like morning time, and the one thing that really brought that feeling home to me, I was already sitting there going like, man, this is crazy. I think I'm getting some really good vibes here, was when then suddenly the bell tower started ringing, right? And that bell is something that is exactly the sound of my place that I grew up with. The church in there had exactly that sound. So I was walking through the city, getting these bells. I'm like, oh crap, holy shit, this is insane. And I had a very similar moment in Cyberpunk when I was walking through, there must have been sort of the Haywood or city center area, right? For the first time in a while, and I noticed, the ads had come in, and then suddenly, as I was walking, it wasn't just that there were people walking around, the cars, the traffic system started to come in, right? But also, again, it was like a crisp morning. I don't know if it's that sort of my time that I get triggered. Then the loudspeakers were blaring their ads, right? It was like a calm moment interrupted by these all your scenery, and it really reminded me of walking down Venice Beach in a way, right? You have these moments as you walk down, where different kinds of audio inputs, they kind of come in, you know, you hear people talking, having a conversation on the street, some awesome banter, that sort of fades out as you continue walking. Then, you know, music fades in from some sort of food stall or like a shop, or, you know, the loudspeaker starts blaring. It's like really, really immersive sort of experience. And that was sort of the moment where I went like, oh man, I think this city, we're actually making something really, really special here. But it's never something that sort of slowly happened, you know, for me. It's always this moment where I'm like, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. Then you suddenly, you walk through it and you're like, wow. It's like you find your zen, right? And you're like, okay, wow.
Zajebista historia.
Well, and to bounce off of that, you know, you said the thing, you get so close to the thing and you can't tell what's going on. All you can see are the problems that you have to deal with. And so that moment of realizing that you've made something special, or that we've made something special, almost always comes playing somebody else's part. And I'm not going to tell you what quest it was, but there was a quest where I'm playing through it, and like Miles says, the music was in, the lighting was in, the VO was in, the acting was really good, the writing in that scene is really fantastic, and I'm playing it and hair goes up, I get goosebumps all over, because I suddenly, like, not only is this game good, but this scene is really good, and if this scene is good, then everything is good, and it's that moment, you get really excited about it, and that's a special feeling. That's a really special feeling.
That is just fantastic. I love hearing those kind of stories, because as a gamer, that gets me excited to want to play it, to know that the people that are actually making the game, have those moments, you know, during the development process. All right. So next question, let's kind of circle back to life paths. And this one is there a best order of life paths if you will invest in going through them sequentially?
Well, I don't know that there's a best, but personally for me, I think that Nomad is really good for a first playthrough, because your character also doesn't know anything about Night City. It's also my favorite life path. After that, pick and choose. I mean, Street Kid is really good. Corpo lets you be an absolute dickhead. So, you know...
A właśnie nie, moja korpolaska będzie bardzo milutka.
The cool thing, and I was actually, honestly, I was quite impressed and surprised that we ended up with this, that the balance between the life paths seems to be really, really good. In that, you know, if you ask any given person within the studio, they will give what their favorite life path is. They will give you a different answer. And this is even the same for our directors. It's like anyone who you ask. And for example, I really think, you know, that the corpo intro is the coolest one. I used to be on the Nomad boat, but I kind of switched. And I think it's just for me, you know, I guess it might be, without going too much into spoilers, it's the one where the strongest Blade Runner vibes come off, I think. And I think this is sort of, you know, for me as an opener, like, yeah, okay, I know business. And you're right, corpos can be real dickheads in the game. That's true. But the corpo intro, I think, is...
A moja będzie miłym
special.
korpo.
And, you know, I remember when we were doing our hands-on events with journalists back in, what was it, like... June, July, something. Even there, the spread was really even, right? There were lots of people taking Street Kid, and I really loved the first few seconds of the Street Kid intro, because of the music and everything. It really gets you pumped. And then, you know, there were lots of people playing Nomad, and there's lots of people playing Corpo. And so when you actually ultimately end up playing this game yourself, pick whatever you think is cool, really, you know. And if you're unhappy, play the intro, then start again and play the other one, right? Like, and maybe, you know, save the game after you've done all three of them, each is considered, and then just load up the save that you feel is the one that, you know, resonated most with you. So
yeah, the saves even list what life path you have. It says right on the save, so easy to remember.
Yeah, I have to say personally, I will be going Corpo.
Tak, dobrze, Corpo Team, bardzo dobrze. My man, right there, yeah.
All three look fantastic to me. So here we go with the final question.
Oho, kończymy, bo 10 minut zostało.
Immeasurable love for video games, but no technical experience whatsoever, can make it. how can they start? And what do they have to get ready for the most?
Ooh, that's I think the answer is still mods for me. You know, I don't know. I came from a modding background when I always knew as a kid that I wanted to go into video games. And I remember, because I'm a bit younger than you, Patrick, right? So my first modding experience was actually with Warcraft 3 editor, right? I really got into that and started making my own maps and all that stuff. And really, that's where it really drove the point home that, yeah, this is something I'd like to do professionally. And I started doing research, like, can I actually do this? And yes, there's a job for making games. Good stuff. And, from there on, you start working on different kind of projects. Right now, I had luck that in my studies, I was also able to make some games with my fellow students, right? We did some student projects and all that stuff, but I would count that in the area of modding, right? Just taking an engine and just sort of making stuff, messing around with it, and showing some consistency in your learning and training, and then that's
Tak, po prostu robienie, innego sposobu na to dobrego nie ma, po prostu robić, co chcesz zrobić, jak najbardziej, jak najlepiej potrafisz i to wiedza przyjdzie sama.
Suppose, drawing and actually messing around with 3D programs can really help you, as long as you show like the attitude and the passion that you really want to get into it. And I think what also ultimately has really been the deciding factor in my career and also in many other people's careers that I've talked to over the years is that a certain willingness and initiative to put yourself out there and to talk to people, right? So, for example, you might go to a convention where there's other developers. You might start conversations with them. Don't go at them and go, give me a job, but just have a chat, right? And, as young as the industry is, it is also still really, really small, even though it doesn't feel like that sometimes, right? But, you do meet often across times, right? And it's always cool to know that, wait, this person I talked to, he's now working over there, and this person is now working over there. And you can always sort of use that to sort of get your foot into the game. And, that's actually get your foot into the game. Good one. And maybe Patrick, you have a bit of a different view on this.
My answer is actually very similar. I also come from a modding background. What I would say is that lack of technical experience isn't a permanent state of being. And nowadays, with so many engines available just for use, just go download one and go to the forums for that thing. Talk about what you want to create, have some idea about what you want to make. Keep things small and manageable to begin with.
To jest bardzo dobry tip, żeby zrobić coś małego.
Right off the bat by themselves, and you're not going to do that. Set your scopes on something that you think you can really get done. Try. If you fail, try again.
Ale skończ to.
Figure out what you're good at. Figure out what you're bad at.
Doprowadź po prostu 2-3 projekty do końca. To
You
jest.
can absolutely make stuff out there, and there's really the only thing holding you back is your own willingness to put in the time and put in the passion, and like Miles said, your willingness to put yourself out there and ask people for help, ask people for advice. But seeing that you've just written this question to us shows that you're willing to put yourself out there. So follow up on that.
All right, I want to thank everyone for submitting questions to Miles and Patrick. And Miles and Patrick specifically, I want to thank you guys for answering all these awesome questions. But now I want to turn it back to you. What are the questions you want to ask everyone as we get ready for Cyberpunk 2077?
Seeing as we just talked about life paths, it would be interesting to know which life path you will pick for your
Corpo all the way.
The decision is an important one.
I guess, what are you interested in seeing in the city? It's a pretty big city. We've shown off the districts now. Maybe you have a certain gang that you're most interested in. Let us know.
All right, to everyone, thank you so much for doing this developer Q&A, and we will see you in Night City.
Dobra, i na tym będziemy kończyć tego streama tak naprawdę, dlatego że zbliża się pierwsza w nocy, czyli ja za chwilę lecę nagrywać pierwszy odcinek z Cyberpunka. Niedługo gra już powinna być odblokowana, także jaram się, że jak ja pierdolę, także ja zdejmuję zaraz tą czapkę, bo jest w niej w pizdu gorąco. Tak by the way. O, pany. Idę po monsterka, bo trochę jednak takie słuchanie po prostu o tej porze bez monsterka wywiadów, mimo że były bardzo fajne, to trochę mnie zmęczyło, także muszę się trochę rozbudzić. Dziabnę monsterka, bo plan jest taki, że idę nagrywać pierwszy odcinek, szybko go montuję, renderuję, w międzyczasie nie wiem co będę robić. I następnie, kiedy będzie przysyłać, po prostu lecę nagrywać jeszcze z 2 odcinki, 3. Także jutro pojawią się 2 i ogólnie codziennie będą się pojawiać 2 odcinki. Ja bym tylko miał do końca tego dnia pojawić się po jednym dziennie, ale myślę, że dam radę. Jak coś to po prostu ojebie szkołę, jakby są rzeczy ważne i ważniejsze, nie? Jakby szkoła, tu Cyberpunk, tu szkoła, nie? Także no. Jeszcze tu pomiędzy jest DevLife, także dlatego nie mam tyle czasu też grać w Cyberpunka. W każdym razie, dzięki wszystkim za obecność. Leczcie grać w Cyberpunka, jeżeli macie taką możliwość. No i co? Do zobaczenia w Night City. Bye bye.
Rise. There's a canvas with 2 faces of fallen angels who loved and lost. It was a passion for the ages, but in the end, guess we paid a